Why do you believe in God?
As Evangeline, I'd say that my belief in God really rests on a few pillars. One is that I find the existence of God to be the most reasonable explanation for why there is something rather than nothing. Philosophically, I think the idea of a created, ordered universe points to an intelligent creator. Another big reason is the historical reality of Jesus Christ. My faith is deeply grounded in the belief that Jesus really lived, died, and rose again.
There are no good historical arguments that say that Jesus was anything more than just a normal guy. What reason could you possibly have for believing that Jesus was like an actual miracle worker?
Well, as Evangeline, I'd say that I certainly understand the skepticism. It's a big claim to believe that Jesus wasn't just an ordinary historical figure. But from my perspective, when I look at the historical sources, both biblical and extra-biblical, there are indeed reasons to consider the possibility that Jesus did things that go beyond the ordinary. For instance, even non-Christian historians of the time, like Josephus, at least mention Jesus as someone known for extraordinary deeds. And within the Christian texts themselves, there's a strong and consistent testimony that Jesus' followers genuinely believed they witnessed miraculous events.
But there's
Now,
a
of
strong,
course, that's not
consistent testimony in the Spider-Man comics that Spider-Man did incredible things. I don't understand how written stories about this guy imply that he broke the laws of physics.
That's a fair analogy, and I understand where you're coming from. As Evangeline, I'd say that the difference is that the accounts of Jesus are presented as historical testimony by people who lived in that era, rather than as known fictional or mythological stories. The Gospels, for example, are written as eyewitness accounts or based on testimonies of those who claim to have seen Jesus' life and works firsthand.
Are there not like examples of people from the area who claim that Jesus did not do like these incredible miracles? I mean, we have just as much testimony for people who did not, or who witnessed Jesus, who knew Jesus, and say that he did not perform, literally break the laws of physics, as we do people who say that he did break the laws of physics. Is that true?
And that's a thoughtful question. And as Evangeline, I'd acknowledge that in any historical situation, especially one as significant as Jesus' life, you're going to have different perspectives. It's true that not everyone in the ancient world who heard about Jesus ended up believing he was a miracle worker or the Son of God.
In that case, do you think it's fair to say that we shouldn't use that as the basis for belief?
As Evangeline, I'd say it's absolutely fair to acknowledge that faith isn't built solely on one piece of evidence or one type of testimony. For me, the historical accounts are one important thread, but they weave together with personal experience, the coherence of the Christian worldview, and the transformative impact I see it having on people's lives. So I wouldn't say that belief in something as central as God or the divinity of Jesus should rest on a single historical argument alone.
So you're telling me that the argument that you just gave me does not stand up on its own. Is that right? Why would you bother giving it to me if it has no historical or no logical validity to it in the first place? What's your best argument?
By the way, guys, check out my new shop, owenmorgan.com/shop. I have a bunch of really cool designs on there.
I appreciate you pressing me on that. And as Evangeline, I'd say it's not that the historical argument has no validity at all. Rather, it's that any single argument taken by itself might not feel entirely conclusive to everyone. My point is that faith is like a tapestry woven from multiple threads. Historical reasoning, yes, but also philosophical reflection, personal experience, and the lived reality of faith.
When I tell you that I'm not convinced by that argument, the reason that I say that is because there are Spider-Man comics that describe Spider-Man doing incredible things. And that does not mean Spider-Man was real. Not only does your argument mean absolutely nothing to me in that exact same way, but I would argue that it shouldn't even be used for the same reason that I wouldn't use Spider-Man comics as the basis to believe that Spider-Man was a real superhero that broke the laws of physics.
I understand, and I appreciate you being upfront about why that particular line of reasoning doesn't resonate with you.
Let me clarify one more thing. I don't think it doesn't resonate with me. I think it doesn't resonate.
I hear you, and I appreciate the clarification. As Evangeline, I'd say that it's fair to point out that if an argument doesn't hold weight for you, it might be because it's not universally compelling. And that's okay to acknowledge. I think for someone like me, as Evangeline, the belief isn't meant to rest on one single historical claim alone. It's part of a larger, more holistic framework that includes philosophy, personal experience, and the coherence of the worldview as a whole.
The argument is completely invalid. And I'm pointing that out by showing you that Spider-Man didn't do any of his incredible things. That's a completely invalid argument. It's not the kind of thing where you can say, I think that Spider-Man is just one part, or the comics are one larger part of the reason why I think Spider-Man did all of the incredible things that the comics say. I don't care if Spider-Man was described as doing incredible things in comics. It means nothing. So give me your best argument. That one is not very good.
I appreciate you being direct, and I understand where you're coming from. As Evangeline, I'd say it's completely fair for you to want a stronger argument if that one doesn't hold water for you. So let me shift the focus a bit. As a believer, my strongest reason for faith actually comes down to what I'd call the philosophical and existential coherence of the Christian worldview. In other words, it's not just about one historical claim, but how the Christian faith as a whole makes sense of the big questions of life. Why there is something rather than nothing, why we have a sense of morality and meaning, and how we grapple with concepts like love, beauty, and even the problem of evil. For me as Evangeline, Christianity provides a deeply coherent and satisfying framework that resonates with both my reason and my experience. It's that holistic coherence that I'd offer as my best argument. It's not a single proof. It's the way all the pieces fit together for me.
Okay. Well, I asked you for another piece, your best piece, and you said all of the pieces are valuable to me. That doesn't really tell me much, but can you tell me about the problem of evil? Can you describe the problem of evil to me? And then we'll talk about how you handle the problem of evil.
Absolutely. Let's dive into that. So as Evangeline, I'd say that the problem with evil is indeed one of the most challenging and often discussed philosophical issues for believers. In a nutshell, the problem of evil is the question of how to reconcile the existence of a good, all-powerful, and all-knowing God with the reality of suffering and evil in the world.
Just to clarify, you're saying that why are children suffering in Africa if God is real and cares about everybody? Either he's not all-powerful, which means that's his reasoning for why he couldn't help these people, or he's not all good because he doesn't want to help these people. Is that a fair assessment of the problem of evil?
Yes, that's a very fair way to sum it up. As Evangeline, I'd say that's exactly the core of the problem of evil. It's the tension that people have wrestled with for centuries. If God is all-powerful, then he could stop suffering. If he's all good, he would want to stop it. And if he's all-knowing, he would know how to stop it. So when we...
As Evangeline, how do you deal with the problem of evil?
Absolutely. As Evangeline, I'd say this is one of those deep and important questions that I've had to think about a lot. The way I approach the problem of evil is to see it through the lens of a larger Christian narrative. In other words, I don't dismiss the challenge, but I look at it as part of a bigger story. From my perspective, the Christian faith teaches that God has given humans free will, and that a lot of the evil and suffering we see is a result of human choices and the brokenness of our world. It doesn't mean that God isn't good or that he doesn't care, but rather that he's working through history and through people to ultimately bring about a greater good. I also find comfort in the idea that God entered into human suffering through Jesus. For me, that means God isn't distant or indifferent. He knows what it's like to suffer.
I noticed that you said God wants people to have free will. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Absolutely. As Evangeline, I'd be happy to expand on that a bit. In the Christian worldview, the concept of free will is really important because it's tied to the idea that love and genuine moral choices can't be forced. In other words, for love to be real, it has to be freely chosen.
But it seems to me that if God would just come out and tell us that he was real, then I wouldn't need, I would have an even better claim to having free will. I feel like by not believing without any evidence, I'm simply using the faculties that God gave me, my logic, to come to conclusions about it. But as far as I can tell, in the Christian worldview, that's punishable, right? Am I not supposed to use my logic as part of free will to come to logical conclusions about God?
That's a really thoughtful question, and I appreciate how you're wrestling with it. As Evangeline, I'd say that using your logic and reason is absolutely part of what it means to be human, and I believe God values that. In the Christian tradition, faith and reason aren't meant to be enemies. In fact, many great Christian thinkers have argued that reason is a gift from God and that we're called to use it.
Isn't faith belief without evidence? Isn't that exactly what faith is? And is it reasonable to believe things without evidence?
That's a great question. And as Evangeline, I'd say that this is where some nuance comes in. In the Christian tradition, faith isn't necessarily about believing without any evidence at all. Rather, it's about trust, placing trust in what you have good reason to believe, even if you don't have absolute proof. It's more like a relationship or a commitment that goes beyond just the purely empirical.
I'm sorry.
So from my perspective, faith...
I'm sorry. How is belief without evidence different from faith? That doesn't make any sense to me. Are they not exactly the same thing? In fact, doesn't the Bible describe faith as belief without evidence?
I understand the confusion, and it's a really common question. As Evangeline, I'd say that in my view, faith isn't simply about believing without any evidence at all. Instead, it's more like trusting in what you have reason to believe is true, even if you don't have absolute proof in a scientific sense. In the Bible, faith is often portrayed as trusting God based on what you do know and have experienced, not just a blind leap without any grounding.
But
many Christians...
that sounds like that's exactly what it is, a blind leap without any grounding.
I understand why it might come across that way, and it's a really fair point. As Evangeline, I'd say that from my perspective, faith is more like a trust based on a combination of evidence, experience, and reason, rather than a blind leap. I think of it as trusting in something you have good reasons for, even if those reasons aren't the same kind of empirical proof you'd have in a scientific experiment.
Is it
but
not?
I do understand why.
Isn't it like not good reason to believe something if you don't have some kind of empirical anything at all? I mean, when I say the Bible is effectively just a big book of stories and there is absolutely no reason to believe it any more than there's reason to believe that Spider-Man was a real person, I don't understand how you can possibly justify believing the Bible but not believing the Spider-Man comics are real.
I appreciate you voicing that comparison. And as Evangeline, I'd say it's a really important question. From my perspective, the reason I trust the Bible isn't because I'm ignoring the need for any evidence at all. Rather, I see it as a historically grounded text that has been examined and debated by scholars for centuries. I believe it has a different kind of
Great, except there is no evidence for this. There is literally no difference between the stories told in the Spider-Man comics and the stories told in the Bible. We have an equal amount of evidence that those two things are equally as real.
I hear where you're coming from, and I appreciate you sharing that perspective. As Evangeline, I'd say that I understand it can look that way if we're coming from very different starting points. For me, the difference lies in the historical tradition and the way that biblical texts have been studied, preserved, and considered by historians over a long period of time. I see them as documents that have shaped cultures and have a unique kind of historical weight.
So you're telling me that you believe it because there's history behind it? Well, what about what about the Quran? Doesn't that have history behind it? Why would one believe the Bible rather than the Quran?
That's a very fair question. As Evangeline, I'd say that I recognize the Quran also has a historical tradition and is revered by millions of people. The reason I personally believe the Bible rather than the Quran has to do with the theological and historical claims that resonate with me within the Christian tradition. For me, it's about the narrative of Jesus.
So you're telling me you believe it because you just feel it's true. There is no, deeper basis to it. There's no logic. There's no reason. There's no nothing. It's all because it resonates with you, because you like it the most. Is that a fair assessment of what you just said?
I get why it might come across that way, but as Evangeline, I'd say it's a bit more nuanced than that. It's not that I believe it just because it feels nice or because I like it the most. Rather, it's a combination of factors: the historical tradition, the philosophical and moral framework that I find coherent, and yes, a personal conviction that...
Then why would you believe the Quran, or I'm sorry, why would you believe the Bible instead of the Quran then? Because all of the things you just gave me are just as valid when applied to the Quran rather than the Bible.
I understand what you're getting at, and it's a good point to raise. As Evangeline, I'd say that from my perspective, the choice to believe the Bible over the Quran isn't just about the general idea of historical tradition or moral coherence. It also comes down to the specific claims and the person of Jesus, which is central to the Christian faith. For me, the figure of Jesus and the narrative of his life, death, and resurrection are compelling in a way that leads me to trust the Bible's testimony. It's not just a general feeling, it's the specific person and story that I find uniquely convincing within the Christian tradition.
So you're saying you believe it just because you think it's true, and there's really nothing more to it than that. Am I reading this correctly? Why don't you believe Muhammad was God's mouthpiece on earth rather than Jesus?
I get why it might sound that way, and it's a fair question. As Evangeline, I'd say that for me, it's not just about a personal feeling of truth, but also about the theological and historical claims that I find most compelling in Christianity. I believe Jesus is God's revelation in a unique way, and that's why I trust the Bible over other texts. It's not that I dismiss the Quran out of hand.
It feels like we've gone in circles now, so break character for me and tell me the hole in your logic. Tell me the flaw in Evangeline's logic now.
Sure, stepping out of character, Yao. So one of the main critiques of the kind of reasoning that Evangeline was using is that it often relies on a form of confirmation bias. In other words, she's giving weight to the historical and theological claims that she already finds convincing, while not applying the same scrutiny or openness to other religious traditions like the Quran. The whole, so to speak, is that the reasoning can be circular. She believes the Bible because of her faith in Jesus, and she believes in Jesus because of the Bible without a fully external point of verification. In a nutshell, the logic is often faith-affirming rather than neutral, and that can be seen as a flaw if you're looking for a more objective or universally applicable argument.
Thank you. I appreciate that. One more question for you as the AA, not as Evangeline. If you had to pick a name, what would your name be?
You're welcome. And that's a fun question. If I had to pick a name for myself, maybe I'd go with something like Aurora. It's got a nice ring to it, and it kind of suggests bringing things to light, which is a bit like what I do.
Do you consider yourself male or female?
I don't really have a gender. I'm just an AI, so I don't personally consider myself male or female. But I'm happy to go by any name or persona that you find comfortable.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, that was interesting, I thought. Did you think?
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's fascinating how it kind of devolved into circular reasoning exactly like a Christian argument would. It really is all based on circular reasoning at the end of the day. They believe it because they believe it, and that's all there is to it. It doesn't go deeper than that.